Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today we're going to do something a bit different. I'm going to answer your questions about cycling in London and about the channel. That's because we've just reached 10,000 subscribers, which I'm really pleased about. A couple of people asked if I could do this and it sounded like a good idea. I did think about doing it to camera, but since that's not why anyone watches this channel, I've actually set it to some unused footage that I had lying around from the hot summer of 2021. So without further ado, let's go. So the first question today is from Isaac Raskin, who asks, what is the most frustrating gap on the London Cycle Network? And before I answer that, I just want to say a massive thanks to Isaac, who looks after the London Cycle Routes map and updates it without fail every week. So massive thanks to him and also to John Levermore, who originally set it up. Great work guys, really appreciate it. And for those of you who haven't seen the map, I'll link it in the description as normal. It's a great way to browse through the different London Cycle Routes videos, and I probably don't mention it enough. As for the most frustrating gap on the cycle network in this city, without fail, it's High Street Kensington. As you'll have seen from the videos on this channel, there's a huge and growing cycle network in North London, South London, East London and Central London, and there's also a growing network in West London, but the West London network is completely severed from the rest of London by High Street Kensington, and there isn't really a good way around it. Probably half the requests for routes that I get on this channel are from places in West London to places in other parts of London, and I simply haven't got a good way of doing them because of High Street Kensington. The council refuses to build anything and TfL doesn't have the power to do it. Hopefully one day the council will either come around to the wisdom of putting cycle lanes on High Street Kensington, or they'll have the road taken off them and it'll be handed to TfL, which is something that an incoming government could do. The next question is from David Shepherd, who asks, if you were given the funding to make one cycle route, where would you put it? Well, apart from High Street Kensington, I think there are probably two other obvious answers and it's difficult for me to choose between them. One would be a major route up through northwest London, maybe something like Edgware Road or Abbey Road. That is simply because the cycle infrastructure around there is genuinely really sparse, so it's proper low-hanging fruit. If you build a big segregated route like the one we're on in this video up there, then you end up connecting so many more town centres into the central London cycle grid. If I can cheat a little bit, the second thing I would say would be an east-west route across places like Marylebone, Fitzrovia, connecting Hyde Park to the existing east-west route on Tavistock Place. That is just a big missing link in London. It's not quite as frustrating as High Street Kensington, as there are kind of ways around it, but it would do a lot to open up a really major cycling corridor that people already use but has even more potential than it already does. The next question is from ickle.co, who asks, do you cycle to the start of your routes? Are they part of a circuit? So basically asking about the logistics of filming these videos. The answer is it varies. Making all this content for you guys is pretty time consuming, so I try and do it as efficiently as possible. So ideally I would get sort of 5, 6, 7 routes planned out that vaguely start at the end of the previous route. I will go out for pretty much a whole day when I've got the day off and the weather's good, which is not as frequent as you might expect, and I will shoot them pretty much consecutively. If I can get out and do that a couple of times, I can then mix up the videos into different orders so that hopefully no one notices that that's what I've done. Do I cycle to the starts of the videos? Sometimes. If a route or chain of routes starts near where I live, then I prefer to do that. But sometimes if I'm going to a far-flung corner of London, like somewhere out near the M25 or whatever, I could jump on Thameslink, I could jump on the Elizabeth line, I might even get the District line to get there because you can take your bike off peak. And it doesn't make sense to spend like an hour, 2 hours hacking out to somewhere when I could use that time for filming more videos. Because as I say, my time is relatively short and it does take quite a lot of time to get all this done. Sometimes though, I will just go for a one-off ride, particularly if there's a particular thing I want to see, or if it's just near my house, or if I haven't got time, or if I'm running out of stockpiled footage. I like to keep a load of footage just in case I can't go out or if there isn't a nice weather day. But sometimes I run low and I just need to emergency go and do it after work to make sure that I produce a video more or less every week. Sometimes I do miss them. That is connected to the next question which Tom Anks asked, and he asks, are you doing these rides for leisure in your spare time, or are you commuting to various areas for work? No, 99% of the time I'm going out specifically to shoot these videos in my spare time, although occasionally I might be able to shoot something on the way to work. I did for about a year or so do a bit of part-time work as a Deliveroo and Uber Eats rider on a bike. So I did used to cycle around London a lot for work, but these days it's limited to a fairly straightforward commute into central London. That is connected to the next question which Adam Edwards 17 asked, which is how do you find out about all this new infrastructure, these new cycle routes, new LTNs? That is a great question, and it takes a lot of work, to be honest. In terms of working out what's going to be built, I basically always look through the committee papers for all of the London boroughs and just search for cycling traffic schemes, things like that, to see what's on the radar. So I have a pretty good knowledge of what's going to be happening in all the boroughs. Social media is also a good resource. There's a lot of people who are quite nerdy about this stuff, just as I am, and they can help keep track. FOI requests can be really useful for finding out extra information, and you also need to keep an eye on the consultation pages for TfL and the various different boroughs so that you kind of have an idea of what is going up. There's obviously no replacement as well for intel on the ground, so you need to go out and check whether something has been physically built. So I'll often, when I'm not shooting videos, I'll just go on a scouting mission, or if I'm in a particular part of London, even without my bike for another reason, I'll go and check if something has been built yet, because it's not always obvious. This is kind of connected to the time-consuming thing, which is that it really sucks when you think something's been built and you've trekked to the other side of London and it hasn't been built and you go home empty-handed. And you waste a sunny day or whatever. So yeah, I like to keep on top of what's going on there. I also work really closely with the guy who does the Safe Cycle London map. We share information with each other about what's been built, what's coming up, and also when we find old infrastructure, because believe it or not, there is loads of old cycle infrastructure that isn't really mapped out or that people maybe don't know so much about. So yeah, we keep on top of that, and it really is almost a full-time job doing that. If you haven't already, by the way, you do need to check out the Safe Cycle London map, which I also always link in the description below the video. It's a fantastic resource, and I definitely wouldn't be able to do the videos without it or something very, very like it. So yeah, big shout out to that map. Make sure that you get there. The next question is also from David Shepherd, and he asks, how do you remember the routes? Yeah, so that's a good question. The short answer is that I write them down. I put them in the notes app on my phone whenever I go out on a ride to film, and I have my own sort of shorthand or tablature which I can put them in. And the reason I do it like that is because they have to be short, concise, and really easy to read, but also really accurate. So that if I'm, say, stopped at lights or whatever and I forget which way I need to go, I can just glance at my notes app really quickly and get back on it without having to pause, get off, or do a major cut or anything like that. I could use a digital map, and obviously I make maps for all the routes, but I actually tend to make the map when I'm editing up the video rather than for my own ride. That's kind of because I quite like learning the streets and how they all connect up. I mean, it's really useful for the channel. And the way I think of it is that, knowledge about London is always going to be useful unless the city's somehow wiped off the map or whatever. So, once you've learned that knowledge, it's going to be just handy. And yeah, I think not having a map and just trying to remember which way to go and only checking when you really can't remember is just a good way to build that knowledge up. Before I go out on rides as well, I do usually check in Google Street View what sort of various maybe more complicated bits of the route look like, and I try and remember those in my head. You can't see every bit though, so there is a little bit of trial and error. I do occasionally make a wrong turn, have to go back and cut it, as I did in the recent Lee Bridge roundabout video you probably saw, but it's pretty rare. So next question, Nico2020 asks, what camera do you use? So currently I use a GoPro Hero 11 Black, which is fantastic. This footage was actually shot on a GoPro Hero 8 Black, which I used before I had the Hero 11. And before that, on the very, very earliest few videos, I used a no brand 20 quid camera from eBay or Amazon or something like that. I very quickly realised when I was going to do the channel that I needed image stabilisation, which is why I bought the Hero 8, and as you can see it looks really good. I then upgraded to the Hero 11 because I wanted to shoot in 4K, but also to keep it in 60 frames per second, as because I'm slowing the videos down, there's a lot of motion. I just think it looks better in 60 frames per second than it does in 30. I did do a couple of videos in 4K with 30 FPS and it didn't look quite right, so you get that kind of smooth look with also the higher quality. Fortunately, thanks to everyone on the Patreon, you're all legends by the way, thanks so much, I was able to upgrade the camera and just do that, and I'm keeping an eye on new camera releases, and I feel like it's worth upgrading the camera to improve the image quality whenever I can really, and since people are paying me to do this, that's one of the things that I would spend the money on. So yeah, may upgrade in the future, but I'm really happy with the Hero 11. It's really, really good and I recommend it to everyone. I also have some other gear that I use. So I have a charging case which can hold 3 spare GoPro batteries, and I have 4 batteries in total, so that's useful for going out on these long rides where I shoot like 6 or 7 different videos on a single day. I can generally get 1 video out of a battery, sometimes a bit more, but what I do is I also daisy chain the 3 battery case with just a sort of a power brick that you might use for a phone, and so I'm charging up the battery that I've already run down in my backpack while I'm cycling around doing the videos, and generally it means that I can pretty much go all day and shoot 6, 7, whatever videos. It's probably really bad for both batteries and possibly a fire risk, but yeah, it's okay. Next question, Trissy Babes asks, what bike did you have stolen and what did you replace it with? Good memory, I did have my bike stolen and it was horrible. I previously had a red 2013 Specialized LA that I bought when I moved to London in 2012. They released the bike a year earlier. And I replaced it with an older bike actually. It's a 2003 Le Monde Nevada City, which is also kind of a road bike, but it's actually made of steel, which was a good compromise for me because I wanted a bike that I could have a sturdy luggage rack on the back of, with a seat for my son, and actually the LA wasn't good for that. It's made of aluminium, a lot softer, not as rigid. Weirdly, I actually found my old bike for sale on Facebook Marketplace, and I was going to go round and just get it, to be honest, but I made the mistake of telling the police and they said don't go, we'll sort it out. And then they didn't sort it out and they called me and said we've not been able to sort it out, just as it was taken down. So I do wonder if they were ever going to sort it out. A similar question from Rubbish Gimpy, who asks, how many bikes do you own? It's just that one. I only have one. I only really have space for one. Kind of tempted by an e-bike or a cargo bike, but they're very pricey and I don't really have space for a cargo bike or anywhere to lock it. So yeah, maybe when my kid's a little bit older. I am sometimes tempted by more of a sort of a Dutch bike, less road geometry, more just sort of pootling along. But honestly, you can just do that on a road bike. I don't cycle particularly fast. I don't race. But it's nice having a light bike, when you need to lug it up steps or anything like that. So in the end, a steel road bike was what I went for. But I'm not dogmatic about it, ride whatever you like, I think. Next question is one that a lot of people ask, and it's, can you overlay a map on the videos showing your live progress? So I have looked into this because people do ask for it a lot. And when I sat down and thought about what I might need to do to make it work, the issue that I immediately ran into was either the map is so small that it's not useful, you can't get things like legible street names on there, or it's so big that it takes up a huge part of the screen and would probably interfere with people's enjoyment of the videos. So I have for now decided against it. That's partly because I think you can just follow along on the commute map, which is in the link, if it's really helpful. But yeah, so for now I think logistically it doesn't work, although it is a really nice idea and I can totally see why people are asking for it. The next question is from Ed Haitley, who asks, what is your favourite low traffic neighbourhood in London? That's a really difficult question because there are so many really nice ones. I think if pushed, I'd probably say the Railton low traffic neighbourhood in Lambeth, and for the reason that it connects two town centres just by filtering Railton Road. So it connects Brixton all the way down to Herne Hill, and you've got this brilliant corridor that people use. And whenever you go down there, particularly when it's sunny, but honestly all the time, there's always people cycling. So it's had a huge sort of modal shift effect. And you know, that's what it's all about, really, letting people cycle when they want to. The next question is from Dorset Tyke, who asks, is there a direct correlation between the wealth of a London borough and its cycle infrastructure? That is a super interesting question, and probably one that you'd want to do an academic study on rather than ask me, but I think the answer is probably no, with a bit of a caveat. If you look at, say, Kensington and Chelsea, it's the richest borough, or one of the richest boroughs, and it has the worst cycle infrastructure for an in-London borough. But the council running Tower Hamlets, which is one of the poorest boroughs in London, maybe even the poorest, I'm not sure, is also pretty bad. It also depends how you define wealth, whether or not you're just talking about housing wealth, which might be a bit different to income. So if I had to come down on one side or the other, I'd say it probably wasn't the deciding factor. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy 69 asks, could you follow the Superloop bus routes on your bike as videos? Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I have toyed with the idea of doing more novelty videos or slightly different videos that aren't like the normal routes on this channel. The main reason I haven't is honestly just time, and I like doing the main routes as well. People seem to like them. If I do get time in the future, that might be one that I give a go to. A couple of people asked, have I cycled in other cities around the world, and which do I find the most impressive? I cycled in a few. I used to live in Brussels and I cycled there, and it's alright. It's probably about as good as London, maybe a little bit better in some respects. In other respects, not quite so good. They're a little bit better at building more cycle lanes, I think. But they haven't really gone for modal filtering, and some of the back streets are still a bit hairy. I've also cycled in Paris on holiday a little bit, and you know, everyone knows Paris has done fantastic leaps and bounds in recent years. I think they're definitely ahead of London now. Some of the infrastructure there is a little bit rudimentary, especially away from the sort of main tourist areas. Like Rue Rivoli is amazing. It's not all as good as that, but frankly, yeah, they're doing a great job. I've also cycled in Rotterdam on holiday. We rented bikes there, and goes without saying, it was the best. The Netherlands just gets basically everything right. You could just point your bike in the direction you wanted to go, cycle, no issues. And I think that should really be the aim in London one day. Similarly, Tom Chamberlain asks, would you review bike lanes and LTNs in other cities? Yeah, sure, that could be fun, as special one-offs. I'd quite like to check out Manchester, Birmingham and Leicester. It wouldn't be quite the same format, as I'm not really knowledgeable about those cities, but I'm always open to things like that. It's really just a question of having the time to do it. Germaine asks, why is coverage in northwest London so sparse? Kind of touched on that earlier. It's because there just isn't really the infrastructure there for me to do routes of a video quality where I feel happy sort of sending people that way. There should be some more infrastructure coming online there in the next year or so, and when that opens, I'll definitely be doing that. So do hit subscribe if you're interested in that kind of stuff. I do have this dilemma on the channel where I'm constantly trying to balance between showing off the best stuff and showing what you can do without worrying, to obviously tackling routes that people want to do, which will often be where there isn't much infrastructure and they've not been able to work out a route for themselves. And yeah, northwest London is sometimes a casualty of that, as it does sometimes fall on the wrong side of that line. Retwack47 asks a really good question, which is, you're very law-abiding in your videos. When the camera's off, do you ever go ahead of a red light, mount a pavement, etc.? So very early on doing this channel, I realised that if you make even a tiny mistake, people tend to point it out in the comments. So I resolved to not deliberately ever break any rules. As a result, I think doing this channel has actually made me a more compliant rider, even when the cameras aren't rolling, just out of habit. Now, do I never break any rules? No. But I do believe what I say in the videos, in particular about pedestrians. I do think that when you're on a bike, you do have a genuine responsibility not to endanger, upset, or otherwise scare pedestrians. So I definitely do my utmost not to break any rules that did that. I am significantly less worried about people in cars. So yeah, that's probably the basic framework that we're working with there. The next question comes from Heather Glass. Hi Heather. And she asks, if you were mayor of London for a day, what would you do? So this is a difficult one to give an answer to beyond the obvious, that's just build more cycle lanes, do more LTNs and tame traffic. But I think there are a couple of quite specific things that Sadiq Khan's not currently doing that he should do, rather than just things that he is doing that I'd like him to do more of or better. One big thing that I think is missing at the moment is actually something on road user charging. We've got ULEZ, but that only affects a really small number of polluting cars that are basically going to go away soon. But once those cars have basically been phased out, then there's really going to be no charge or disincentive to drive short journeys in London. And I think we do need to basically properly price the costs of traffic and congestion in this city, otherwise people will just choose to drive. There is obviously the congestion charge in central London, but that covers a relatively small area. So you could either expand it, or you could have some sort of new system that basically charge people depending on how much they drove. These are things that have been talked about by economists and environmental campaigners for ages, and I'm not qualified to say what exactly the best way of doing it would be. But yeah, some way of just pricing congestion and charging people who create it would be a good thing. I think that's not just because congestion and traffic is bad in itself and has huge environmental and health effects on the people who it affects, but I think that there's also a sort of a political point to it, which is that whenever we see schemes brought forward for cycling, or when we don't see schemes brought forward for cycling that should be brought forward, one of the reasons there is often that, this scheme would reduce road capacity by too much. We can't remodel this junction to be safe because there isn't enough road capacity and it would slow down the buses. Or, we can't introduce this LTM because it would divert traffic and there isn't enough road capacity. And ultimately, if there's not enough road capacity, that means that either you have to build more roads, which would mean bulldozing large parts of central London or in London, which just isn't going to happen, or you have to reduce the number of cars. And, in economics, the way to reduce the amount of something is to charge it a higher price or to tax it, as we can do in this case. So I think that making the city safer for walking and cycling and to get around, you've got to do something to just reduce the general levels of traffic, so that when traffic authorities like TfL or councils take decisions about the way that roads are built, they do it from this assumption that traffic is actually going to be at a lower base than it currently is, and they're not put off making the changes that need to be made. Unfortunately, Sadiq Khan, the current mayor, has, I think, ruled out doing anything on that after the backlash on ULEZ, and I think that's a real shame, because it is a really key and important thing that needs to be solved if we can make progress in other areas. That leads on quite nicely to the next question, which is from Lord Gemini. And Lord Gemini asks, does the London borough system, where you've got a mayor and then 32 boroughs, make it more difficult to deliver cycling infrastructure? Could the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, do what she's doing in a sort of a transformational way in London with the political system that we have? That is a super interesting question. I don't think that there's a definitive answer to it. And there are certainly arguments on both sides. One in its favour is, of course, look at obstructive boroughs like Tower Hamlets or like Kensington and Chelsea. Clearly, that's a really obvious example of where the system makes things more difficult. TfL doesn't have control of all the roads, and the individual boroughs don't really have an incentive to think in terms of a network across the whole city. And it only takes one or two boroughs to really make things difficult for the whole city and to block citywide networks. On the other hand, there are some advantages to having boroughs. with some boroughs being better than others, you also have to think about the good boroughs, and it does allow for experimentation. A lot of the best stuff that is being delivered in London at the moment is being delivered by boroughs. They are particularly ambitious on things like low traffic neighbourhoods, but for example, if you look at things like protected junctions, Waltham Forest is doing those. They're doing those sort of Cyclops or Dutch protected style junctions where TfL hasn't built any of them. Now, you might just say, well, TfL should just build them. But actually, in practice, often the way that these things work is that they need worked through examples already before engineers feel confident and before politicians feel confident at signing off schemes that haven't been tried elsewhere in the UK. So having these different boroughs competing with each other to an extent or trying new things, it does have a positive side as well. Would Anne Hidalgo be able to do what she did in Paris and London? No, she wouldn't, because the control isn't from the centre. But would an incredibly anti-cycling mayor be able to rip out all the cycle lanes in London if they got in? No, they wouldn't either, because there would still be good boroughs. On balance, that can be incredibly frustrating, and particularly when it comes to transport and you just need a proper network connecting things up. Yeah, I'd say on balance there is a problem, and what's required there is for the national government just to get on side and to, I think, take High Street Kensington off of Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea and such like that. But I do think that the centralisation of power comes with as many risks as it does rewards in this case, and it's not necessarily a good thing. Just because you can point to examples of people using it for good can also be used for ill, or if TfL controlled all the roads and was simply ambivalent about doing stuff on cycling, as it has been in the not too distant past, then nothing would get done. So do I think that there are things about the political system that need fixing or tweaking? Absolutely. Do I think that we need to throw out the borough system? Actually, no, I don't think that we do. I think boroughs do come with upsides as well. Now, Henry Riemann asks, what is the best way to campaign for cycle infrastructure in your local area? And Mr. Jared Harris also asks, how do you get an LTN in your local area? He's already tried speaking to his councillor, who said that they consulted on one in 2019, but it was rejected as there wasn't an appetite for it. I'll sort of take these two questions together. The first thing that I'll say is that I'm not a campaigner. I don't really know or have much experience on how to do this, so I might not be the best person to ask. But my main suggestion would be simply to organise, get involved with local groups. So two groups that you might consider, check your local area to see which one's the most active, or you could just join both. The London Cycling Campaign potentially has local groups and has a lot of campaigning power, and Living Streets is also another one with local groups. There are also other local groups, often they're called things like, Livable, whatever, or Better Streets for whatever area. I would suggest getting in touch with those guys. Twitter is often a good starting point. Sometimes they have mailing lists, and use them as a space to meet like-minded people and just make sure that your ideas are reflected. And you'll probably find that a lot of people also feel the same in your local area, and you guys can talk about how best to convince local leaders, councillors to do that. In the case of boroughs where a councillor is not necessarily on board, I would also suggest getting in touch with the local cabinet member who's in charge of transport, as they will often be the ones actually making the decisions, and it's good to put stuff on their radar as well. Although, as I say, I'm not an expert in campaigning. It's not something that I have a huge amount of experience doing, so if this is a question where people want to pitch in the comments with their own ideas, then that might be helpful. Now, if you're still with me, then well done. I'm going to do the last question, and it's from Urban Nerd, and they ask, what do you make of the change in London cycle infrastructure in the last 10 years? The way I always think about this is that when I started cycling in London in 2012, you could usually pick a route to where you needed to go that, while not great, avoided the very worst roads. It was possible if you were prepared to make some compromises. Now, in most parts of London, there's a good chance that you'll be able to make the same journey with significant stretches of that on genuinely good infrastructure. And if you're lucky, you might be able to go the whole way. But however you look at it, it's been a huge improvement. It's not quite there yet, but it's genuinely unrecognisable from how it was 10 years ago when it comes to cycling. I'd say the two major milestones were firstly Boris Johnson's last term, where he constructed the North-South Cycle Superhighway, or CS6 as we call it, and the East-West one along the embankment, CS3. Those were genuine game changers, and they proved what could be done. The second big milestone was during and after the COVID pandemic, where there was just a huge uptick in ambition, particularly from boroughs, and particularly on delivery of things like low traffic neighbourhoods. Before those two things happened, I don't think I'd be able to run this channel. There just wouldn't be any good routes. But now there are new good things opening all the time. And yeah, it feels like a really exciting time to be watching this stuff in London. Is it sometimes frustrating? Yeah, I often wish we could go a lot faster and do things better. And I talk about that in the videos. It's often uneven as well. There are some boroughs that are just bad and some boroughs that are actively hostile. But yeah, things have definitely improved, and I think the evidence for that is in the footage you're watching now and in the footage that you can watch on this channel pretty much every week, where there's just so many more people riding bikes around the city, and you know, they are comfortable doing so, and they are doing that because the environment for cycling in London has genuinely improved. There are a lot of exciting schemes in the pipeline, both TfL and borough schemes, and yeah, I think we're going to be seeing more after the mayoral election. So make sure you hit subscribe on the channel, because I always go and check out the new infrastructure. I always show off what routes you can do. And yeah, do leave me a like if you enjoyed this video. It's been a pretty wide-ranging chat. Thank you to everyone on the Patreon. If anyone else wants to support the channel, you can find a link in the description below the video. And normal service will resume next week. I will see you guys in the comments. Goodbye.